The market was alive with noise. Voices shouted prices, coins clinked. Alien spices filled the air with sharp scents, and the ground was wet from the morning rain. Traders from a dozen different worlds filled the street, their strange clothes and bright banners creating a moving sea of colors. Ethan walked slowly through it all, scanning the stalls. He was here for food and spare parts for his small cargo ship. He kept his hood up to hide his human features. Humans weren't exactly welcomed here, not after the trade wars. Most locals either ignored him or glared with quiet dislike. He had learned to keep his head down, do business fast, and leave. But today, something made him stop. It was a voice, small, trembling, almost lost in the noise of the market. "Just milk for my sister, please." Ethan turned his head toward the sound. She was standing near a fruit stall, no more than 10 years old by human guessing. Her skin was pale lavender, too pale like the color had been washed out by sickness or hunger. Her clothes were ragged, torn at the sleeves, and her feet were bare. In her small hands she held a cracked metal cup, and her large dark eyes were fixed on the shopkeeper. But the shopkeeper wasn't looking back kindly. He was frowning, his thick hands crossed over his chest. Around them, a few bystanders paused to watch, whispering to each other, "Go beg somewhere else, half-blood," the shopkeeper growled in the local tongue. "You're scaring away paying customers? I can pay." Later, the girl whispered, "Just milk for my sister. She's too weak." The crowd reacted with cruel laughter. One alien man tossed a piece of rotten fruit at her feet. Another shook his head. "She's trash blood," someone said loudly. "If her kind dies, the streets will be cleaner." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He had seen poverty before. He'd seen hungry children on backwater worlds. But something about the way this girl stood, there shaking but refusing to run, hit him harder than he expected. She reminded him of someone, years ago. His own little sister back on Earth, crying from the cold when their parents couldn't afford heat. The girl's hands trembled as she held the cup out again. "Please." The shopkeeper stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. "Get out before I call patrol." Before he knew it, Ethan was moving toward them. "What's going on here?" I asked in a calm voice. The shopkeeper's eyes narrowed. At the sound of his accent, "Not your business, human. This one's a beggar from the slums. They're not allowed to take food from here. It's the law." Ethan crouched down so he could look the girl in the eyes. Up close, she looked even smaller, her cheeks hollow, her lips dry and cracked. Her hair dark and tangled hung over her face, but she didn't look away. "What's your name?" Ethan asked quietly. She hesitated, glancing nervously at the shopkeeper, then back at Ethan. "Lyra," she whispered, "and your sister." Lyra's voice broke a little. "Novi, she can't get up. The milk is all she can drink now." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How long has she been like that?" "2 days, Lyra said. "She's getting worse." The shopkeeper made an impatient noise. "Enough. Move on, human. You'll get yourself in trouble helping her kind. Patrol will have both of you if they see you giving her food." Ethan didn't move. His eyes were still on Lyra. She wasn't crying. That somehow made it worse. Crying meant you still had some hope. This girl looked like she'd learned hope was useless. He stood up slowly, turning toward the shopkeeper. "How much for the milk?" I said. "I'm not selling to her," the shopkeeper snapped. "You give her anything, you'll be breaking the law." Ethan reached into his pouch and placed several credits on the counter. "Then I'm buying it for me." The shopkeeper didn't touch the credits. "And if it ends up in her hands, I'll have patrol on you before you leave the market." Around them, more people had stopped to watch. Ethan could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see if he'd back down. A human, alone, surrounded by unfriendly locals. It wasn't a smart fight to pick, but he was already tired of walking past things he couldn't change. 2 bottles of milk, Ethan said, his voice flat. And bread, if you have it. The shopkeeper's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Ethan didn't answer. He watched as the man reluctantly poured milk into 2 containers and wrapped a small loaf of bread in paper. Ethan took them and set them in Lyra's hands. Her eyes widened. She looked from the food to Ethan, then back again, as if she couldn't believe this was real. Take me to your sister, Ethan said. Lyra blinked, clearly caught between hope and fear. She glanced around, as if expecting someone to stop them. Go, Ethan urged. Finally, she nodded and turned, leading him away from the stall. The crowd murmured behind them, some voices mocking, others angry. Ethan ignored them as they walked. Toward the far edge of the market, Lyra looked up at him once and said in a small voice, "They'll be angry. You helped me." Ethan gave a faint, grim smile. Let them be angry. Just show me where she is. They disappeared into the narrow, shadowed streets beyond the market, leaving the noise behind. But Ethan could still feel the stares on his back. And he knew this wasn't over. The deeper they walked into the side streets, the quieter the world became. The noise of the market faded, replaced by the distant drip of leaking pipes and the occasional hiss of steam from vents in the walls. The smell of spices and cooked food was gone now, replaced by damp, rot, and the sour stink of garbage. Lyra kept glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to be following them. Ethan noticed her steps were quick but careful, avoiding the broken stones in the road as if she had walked this path 100 times before. "You're sure your sister's close?" Ethan asked softly. Lyra nodded but didn't look at him. "Just ahead. But if the patrol sees you with me, they'll take you too." "I'll take my chances," Ethan replied. They reached the edge of a narrow alley, where a single flickering light hung above a closed shop door. Lyra stopped suddenly and peered around the corner. Her small shoulders stiffened. "What is it?" Ethan asked. She hesitated before whispering, "The milk. If you give it to me here, you can go back to your ship. You don't have to come all the way." Ethan frowned. "Why would I leave now?" "Because if you're with us, it will be worse for you," Lyra said. "They don't care about us, but your human people will notice. The patrol will notice, and if they take you, my sister will die anyway." Her words were quiet, but the way she said them was too old for someone her age. Ethan recognized it, the voice of someone who had been forced to think. Like an adult far too early, he crouched slightly so they were eye to eye. "Lyra, I'm not here to drop off milk and walk away. I said I'd help. It means I'll see this through." Her lips trembled for a second, then she nodded. Turning quickly into the alley, they passed rusting crates, broken glass, and dark stains on the walls that Ethan didn't want to think about. Somewhere ahead, a faint, shallow breathing could be heard. Ethan stepped forward only for a shadow to move at the alley's mouth behind them. A deep voice barked something in the local language. Lyra froze. Ethan turned to see a thick-set alien man leaning against the wall. His uniform was black, with the crest of the city painted across the chest. One of the patrol. "What are you doing here, human?" the patrolman demanded, switching to trade speech. His eyes flicked to Lyra, and with her, Ethan stayed calm. "Just buying food," the patrolman snorted. "For yourself, I hope, because feeding the unregistered is a crime." "She's one of them." He gestured at Lyra as if she were some piece of trash, half-blood. "You know the rules." Lyra stepped back, clutching the milk tighter. Her body pressed against the wall as if she wanted to disappear into it. Ethan stepped sideways, placing himself between her and the patrolman. "She's just a kid." That kid, the patrolman said coldly, doesn't belong here. Her kind spreads disease, they steal, they beg, they weaken the city. If you're smart, you'll hand her over now. Ethan's jaw tightened. And what happens then? She'll go where the rest of her kind go. The patrolman's voice carried no emotion. Like he was talking about moving a piece of cargo, Ethan didn't need to ask what that meant. He had heard rumors, camps, work mines, places where the weak didn't survive long. Lyra's breathing was fast now. Please, she whispered. Not sure if she was talking to Ethan or the patrolman. Ethan didn't move. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. I'll take responsibility for her. The patrolman laughed. You, a human traitor. You think the council will honor that? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'll tell you what will happen. You'll be fined, banned from the market, maybe locked up for a few days. She'll vanish. And no one will remember her name. For a moment, Ethan thought about it. Walking away was safer. He could pretend he hadn't seen her. He could go back to his ship, leave this city, and forget. But the memory came back his sister. On a winter night years ago, shivering in the dark because they had no heat. He remembered the hopeless look in her eyes before he had found a way to keep her warm. If someone had walked past that night, Ethan looked the patrolman straight in the eyes. No. The word hung in the air. The patrolman's smile faded. Then you're making a dangerous choice. Ethan didn't look away. So be it. The patrolman stepped back slowly, but his voice was a threat. If I see you in the city again, human, I won't be so patient. He turned and walked away, boots echoing against the walls until the sound faded. Lyra let out a breath she had. Been holding? You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Yes, I did, Ethan replied. They moved quickly now. Lyra leading him deeper into the alley, away from the open streets. Every sound made her flinch. When they finally reached a corner where the walls were damp and green with mold, she stopped and pointed to a dark opening in the side of a building. She's in there, Lyra whispered. Ethan stepped toward it, his hand brushing the grip of the small shock pistol hidden under his coat. Something told him they weren't done with trouble yet. Asterisk. The opening in the wall was barely tall enough for Ethan to step through without ducking. Inside, the air was cold and stale, smelling faintly of damp cloth and something sour. The walls were cracked, the floor covered in bits of trash paper scraps, old rags, and pieces of broken crates. Lyra stepped in first, careful not to trip over the scattered debris. She moved like someone who had walked this path many times before, knowing where the ground was safe and where it might give way. Ethan followed, keeping the milk bottles steady in his hands. In the farthest corner, against a wall darkened by water stains, lay a small bundle of fabric. At first, Ethan thought it was just a pile of discarded rags, till the bundle moved. Lyra hurried to it and knelt down. Novi, I'm back. The bundle shifted again, and a tiny face peeked out. Novi was much smaller than Ethan had imagined. Her skin was the same pale lavender as Lyra's, but almost translucent, stretched thin over her fragile bones. Her lips were dry, her eyes half open, but glazed with exhaustion. She looked more like a shadow of a child than a living one. Lyra gently lifted her sister's head and slid the cracked cup under her chin. Here, Novi. Drink. Ethan opened one of the milk bottles and poured carefully, making sure the liquid was warm from his hand. Novi's lips trembled before she began to sip slowly, each swallow taking effort. Lyra kept one hand on her sister's forehead, brushing the messy hair away. Ethan crouched down beside them. She's been like this long. Lyra nodded without looking up. Since the fever, 2 weeks ago. I found medicine once, but it wasn't enough. She hasn't eaten solid food in days. Milk is all she can take. Novi made a small sound, more a whimper than a word, and Lyra quickly shushed her, humming a tune so soft Ethan could barely hear it. He felt a knot in his chest. The baby was so light in her sister's arms that he wondered how she was still breathing. Lyra glanced at him finally, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why did you follow me here? You could have left." Ethan sat back on his heels. "Because I've seen this before. Back home, people turned away from kids like you because they didn't want trouble. I was one of those kids. Know what it feels like to be ignored." Lyra studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. "And what now?" "You'll give us milk and go." "That's what most people do. They give just enough so they feel better, then they leave. And then we're worse off." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I'm not most people." She looked away, focusing on helping Novi finish the milk. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of the baby swallowing and the faint hum of Lyra's song. Then Novi coughed lightly and closed her eyes, the empty cup slipping from her lips. Lyra tucked her in again, using one of the least torn pieces of cloth to wrap her tightly. She moved with the care of someone who had been both mother and sister for far too long. Ethan glanced toward the narrow entrance of the shelter. He didn't like how exposed it was. If anyone followed them, they could be trapped here easily. Lyra, he said quietly, "This place isn't safe. You can't stay here." "We have nowhere else," she replied simply. "If we go to the camps, we die. If we go to the streets, the gangs find us. Here, at least, no one bothers us. Most of the time." The way she said "most of the time" made Ethan's stomach tighten. "You've had trouble here before." She gave a small shrug, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. "Sometimes people come to take what little we have. Last week, someone tried to take Novi." Ethan's hands clenched. "Tried to take her?" Lyra's voice was flat. "They said she'd fetch a good price. I hid her in the walls until they left." Ethan took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. This wasn't just about hunger anymore. It was about survival in a city that didn't care if children disappeared. "I'm not leaving you here," Ethan said finally. Lyra turned sharply. "And go where?" "You don't understand. The patrols will look for us. You already caught their attention today. If they see you again before she could finish." A faint sound came from outside. Footsteps, slow, measured, more than one set. Ethan stood instantly, his hand going to the shock pistol. Under his coat, Lyra froze, clutching Novi tightly. The footsteps stopped just outside the opening. Then a voice, deep, calm, and cold, spoke in the local language. "I told you, human," it said. Ethan recognized it instantly. The patrolman from earlier. Lyra's breath caught, and Ethan could see her eyes darting around, looking for a place to hide Novi. But there was nowhere to go. The only exit was the way they'd come in, and it was now blocked. Ethan moved to stand between the entrance and the sisters. "You followed us." "Of course," the patrolman replied. "I had to see where you were taking the girl." "Now I know." Two more shadows moved behind him. Reinforcements. Ethan's mind raced. If they took the girls now, he'd never see them again. And he knew exactly what would happen to them. The patrolman stepped closer. "Hand them over, and I'll forget I saw you. Resist, and you'll regret it." Ethan's grip on the pistol tightened. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "You'll have to go through me first." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Novi's soft breathing. And in that moment, Ethan knew there was no turning back. The narrow shelter seemed to shrink as the patrolman stepped inside, his broad shoulders brushing the cracked walls. The dim light from the alley caught the edges of his armor, making the black plating look even harder, sharper. Behind him, two other guards stood at the entrance, blocking the only way out. Lyra pulled Novi closer against her chest, her small body curling protectively around her sister. Her eyes darted to Ethan, silently begging him not to leave them, but also terrified of what might happen if he didn single quotes to the patrolman's heavy boots crunched on bits of broken glass as he moved forward. His voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something in it that made the air feel colder. "Human," he said, "you're making a mistake. Give me the children. Walk away. No one will bother you again." Ethan didn't move from where he stood, blocking the path between the guards and the sisters. His hand rested inside his coat, fingers wrapped around the grip of his shock pistol. His voice was steady, even though his pulse was pounding. "They're not yours to take." The patrolman gave a short, humorless laugh. "Everything unregistered in this city belongs to the council. And you? You have no right to be here without a sponsor. You're already on thin ice." "I have a trade license," Ethan said, narrowing his eyes. "And I can make it disappear with one word," the patrolman replied smoothly. "Do you think anyone will defend a human smuggler who protects trash bloods?" Ethan glanced at Lyra for just a second, just enough to see her trying to make herself smaller. Her head bent so her face was hidden behind her tangled hair. Novi whimpered softly in her arms, and Lyra whispered something soothing in their own language. Ethan stepped forward, forcing the patrolman to halt. "They're under my care now," he said. "By interspecies trade law, that makes them my assistants. Touch them, and you'll be violating that law." The patrolman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You think law matters here?" He took another step, now close enough that Ethan could see the faint scars on his jaw. "Out here, law is whatever the strongest man says it is." The room felt heavy with tension. The two guards at the door shifted slightly, hands on their weapons, watching for Ethan to make the wrong move. Ethan knew he couldn't win in a straight fight. Not here. Not now. But fear had never been enough to make him back down before then. "I guess," Ethan said quietly, "we're going to find out who's stronger." The patrolman's expression hardened. "Last chance, human." Ethan didn't move. The patrolman lunged. Ethan sidestepped fast, drawing the shock pistol in one smooth motion. The weapon hissed as it powered on, and Ethan fired at the patrolman's shoulder. Blue arcs of energy cracked through the air, striking the armor and making the man stagger back with a grunt. One of the guards at the entrance shouted and started forward. But Ethan turned the pistol on him. "Don't," he warned. The guard hesitated, clearly weighing whether this stranger was worth the fight. The patrolman straightened slowly, rubbing his shoulder where the charge had hit. His voice was low and dangerous now. "That was a mistake you won't live to repeat." Ethan kept the pistol raised, his stance steady. "Walk away." For a long, tense moment, it seemed like the patrolman might rush him again. The air between them was thick with unspoken threat. But then his eyes flicked to the guards at the entrance. "Leave him," he said suddenly. "For now." The two guards stepped back, still watching Ethan like wolves watching prey. The patrolman turned and walked out into the alley. But before disappearing into the shadows, he looked back. "You have until nightfall, human. After that, no law, no gun, and no lie will save you." The moment they were gone, Ethan lowered the pistol but didn't relax. His ears strained for the sound of returning footsteps. When none came, he turned to Lyra. She was staring at him with wide eyes, holding Novi so tightly it looked like she might never let go. You made them leave," she whispered, as if afraid speaking too loud might call them back. Ethan knelt beside her. "Not for long. They'll be back, and next time they won't give us a warning." Lyra's mouth trembled, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once, her jaw tightening. "Then we have to go." Ethan nodded. "Do you know anywhere outside the city? Somewhere they won't find you?" Her eyes shifted away. There's a way, but it's dangerous. Ethan almost smiled. Everything worth doing is. He looked at the tiny bundle in her arms. Novi was asleep again, her small face pressed against her sister's shoulder. Ethan knew she wouldn't survive another. Weak here not, with patrols watching and predators in the streets. He holstered his pistol, stood, and offered Lyra his free hand. "Show me the way." She hesitated for only a second before taking it. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond the alley, the market's noise was starting to fade into the hum of night. Patrols would double after sunset. Ethan knew their time was short, but he also knew one thing: he wasn't letting go of their hands until they were safe. The city was changing as night drew closer. The streets were darker now, the glow from market lanterns dimming one by one. Shadows stretched longer between the narrow buildings, and the sound of footsteps echoed more sharply. Patrol drones buzzed overhead, their blue scanning lights sweeping. Across alleys, Ethan kept his hood low, one hand guiding Lyra, while the other stayed near his pistol. Novi slept in Lyra's arms, too weak to wake. Every few steps, Lyra would glance over her shoulder, her face tense. They didn't speak until they reached the outer edge of the market district, where a broken wall hid them from view. Only then did Ethan ask, "Where's this way out to you?" "Mentioned?" Lyra looked up at him, her voice low. "It's not a road. It's an old sewer tunnel. It runs under the east wall of the city, all the way to the marshlands outside." Ethan frowned. "Sewer tunnel." She nodded. "No one uses it anymore. It's dangerous. Parts have collapsed, and the water's deep in some places. But patrols. Don't go there, they think it's sealed." Ethan thought for a moment. Why hasn't anyone else used it to escape? "They have," Lyra said quietly. "Some didn't make it. Others made it out. But the marshlands are full of things. That hunt at night. You have to move fast." He looked down at Novi, her head resting against her sister's shoulder. "Can she survive the journey?" Lyra hesitated before answering. "If we stay here, she won't survive the week. In the tunnel, at least she has a chance." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then, that's where we go." They moved quickly toward the eastern district, keeping to side streets where the shadows were thick. Ethan noticed more patrols than before, their voices sharp as they barked orders at street vendors to pack up and leave. News of his earlier confrontation must have spread. They reached the docking bay where Ethan's small cargo ship was hidden. He led Lyra inside, closing the heavy doors behind them. Lyra's eyes widened as she stepped into the dimly lit hold. "This is your ship." "Yeah, not much to look at, but it flies," Ethan said, moving to a storage crate. "If we can make it through the tunnel, we can circle back and take off from the marsh. No checkpoints." Lyra looked uncertain. "Won't they search the docks?" "They will," Ethan admitted. "That's why we won't be here when they do." He pulled open a crate and began packing supplies: water flasks, ration packs, and a thermal blanket. He also grabbed a small toolkit and an emergency flare gun. He handed Lyra a small flashlight. "You'll need this," he said. "The tunnel will be dark." She turned it over in her hands, as if testing its weight. "I haven't held something this new in years," she murmured. While Ethan packed, Lyra found herself looking at him differently. Most humans who came to this city treated her like she wasn't worth their time. But this man, he had risked trouble for her, and now he was risking even more. She couldn't understand why. "Why are you helping us?" she asked suddenly. Ethan paused, his hands still over the crate. "Because once, someone helped me when they didn't have to. And if they hadn't, I wouldn't be here now." Lyra looked down at Novi, tightening her grip. She didn't know what to say to that. They left the ship shortly after, slipping out into the night again. The air had grown colder, and the distant rumble of thunder hinted at a storm. Lyra led him through winding alleys until they reached a narrow street lined with abandoned shops. At the far end, hidden under a pile of rusted metal sheets, was a large grate. The smell that rose from it was foul and damp. "This is it," Lyra said, kneeling to pull the sheets away. Ethan crouched beside her, inspecting the grate. The bolts were rusted, the metal weak. With a few hard tugs, it broke free, clattering to the ground. The tunnel yawned before them, black, wet, and silent. A thin trickle of water ran down its center, disappearing into the darkness. Ethan shone his flashlight inside. The beam lit up cracked walls covered in moss, the air shimmering slightly from the damp. Somewhere far ahead, he thought he heard the faint splash of water. "You're sure this leads out?" he asked. "Yes," Lyra said firmly. "I've seen others go in and come out." Her silence was answer enough. Ethan took a deep breath. "Then we'd better move fast." He climbed down first, his boots splashing in the shallow water. Lyra followed, holding Novi close to her chest. The cold air wrapped around them immediately, smelling of mold and rust. Above them, the city felt far away. Down here, the only sounds were the echo of their footsteps and the faint drip of water from somewhere ahead. Ethan took the lead, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Lyra stayed close behind, her own light illuminating the walls. After a few minutes, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber where the water was deeper. Ethan tested the depth with his boot tit, came up to his knees. "Stay close," he said. They waded through slowly, each step sending ripples across the black surface. Somewhere in the shadows, something moved, sending a small wave back toward them. Lyra's voice was barely above a whisper. "We're not alone in here." Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight and glanced over his shoulder. "Keep moving. We have to get out before nightfall turns to midnight." Behind them, far in the distance, there was a faint metallic clang. It didn't sound like dripping water. It sounded like boots hitting metal. Ethan's pulse quickened. The patrol had found the grate. The sound of boots echoed faintly from behind them, slow at first, then growing louder, sharper, like a drumbeat, chasing them through the darkness. The water in the tunnel rippled with each vibration. Ethan quickened his pace. "Move, Lyra. We don't have long." Lyra held Novi tightly to her chest, her arms trembling from the weight and cold. The baby's head rested against her shoulder, but even in sleep, her breathing was shallow. Lyra's small flashlight bounced with every step, sending shaky beams. Across the slimy walls, the tunnel narrowed, forcing them into single file. The ceiling dropped low, making Ethan hunch forward to avoid hitting his head. Their footsteps splashed in rhythm, and every sound seemed to bounce endlessly off the stone. The boots behind them were getting closer. Ethan turned his head slightly. "Don't look back, just keep moving." "I'm not afraid of them, Lyra," whispered, her voice shaking anyway. "I'm afraid of what happens if they take her." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They won't." A few meters ahead, the tunnel split into two, paths, one straight ahead, the other dipping downward into black water. "Which way?" Ethan asked. "Straight," Lyra said quickly. "The other way is a dead end. I've seen it." They kept moving, the air growing colder. The water was deeper now, swirling around Ethan's knees. Somewhere ahead, a soft, rushing sound echoed. Like a stream flowing fast, Lyra's flashlight beam caught something moving in the water. She froze. "Ethan." "What was that?" He stopped beside her, aiming his light at the surface. The beam revealed ripples, but nothing else. Still, the water shifted oddly, as if something large had passed just beneath their feet. "Keep going," he said, firmly. "Don't stop for anything." They pressed on. The rushing sound grew louder until they reached a section where the tunnel floor dropped sharply, forming a waist-deep pool. Ethan went first, wading slowly so the water didn't splash too high. Lyra followed, clutching Novi above her head to keep her dry. Halfway through, a low gurgle rose from the depths. A dark shape swirled beneath the surface. Ethan turned just in time to see a long, eel-like form dart past his legs. "Go," he barked, moving faster. Lyra's breath came in short bursts as she pushed forward. The water churned around her knees, and the eel-like thing passed again closer, this time. Its movement sent a cold wave against her skin. They climbed out onto AIT. They climbed out onto a narrow ledge where the water thinned back to ankle-deep. Lyra set Novi against her shoulder, rocking her gently to calm her. "Keep walking," Ethan urged, glancing back. The boots were louder now. A faint light from the patrol's torches flickered far behind them, bouncing against the tunnel walls. "They're in here," Lyra whispered. Ethan's voice was calm, but his pace quickened. "Then we make sure they don't catch us." The tunnel ahead sloped upward, but the path was blocked by a fallen beam of corroded metal. Rusted pipes jutted from the ceiling where it had broken loose. Ethan braced himself against the wall and pushed. The beam groaned, but it wouldn't budge. "Help me," he told Lyra. She placed Novi down gently on a dry piece of stone and pressed her small hands against the beam. Together, they shoved. With a final creak, it rolled aside, splashing into the water. Ethan grabbed Novi and helped Lyra. Over the debris, the tunnel widened slightly beyond the blockage, but the smell was worse. Now a thick, rotting stench that clung to their throats. "What's that smell?" Lyra asked, covering her nose. "Something dead," Ethan muttered. They passed the source a moment later, large. Skeletal creature half submerged in the water, its sharp teeth still bared in a silent snarl. Lyra averted her eyes, holding Novi closer. Behind them, the patrol's voices grew sharper. They were calling to one another, their words echoing. "They're close," Lyra whispered. "I know," Ethan said. He looked ahead. "We're almost there." The tunnel ended in a heavy iron grate, its bars thick and rusted. Beyond it, faint silver light spilled through the cracks the outside. Lyra's breath caught. "We made it." "Not yet," Ethan said grimly. He grabbed the bars and pulled. They groaned but didn't give. The bolts were solid despite the rust. The boots were so close now that he could hear the splash of water as the patrol moved through the pool behind them. Ethan yanked harder. The metal screeched, bending slightly. Lyra placed Novi down again and added her strength, her small hands gripping the cold bars. With a final, harsh crack, one of the bars snapped. Ethan shoved Lyra and Novi through the gap first, then forced his own body after them. The cold night air hit them like a wave. They stumbled into the marsh, the mud soft under their feet. Behind them, angry shouts rose from the tunnel as the patrol reached the grate. "They're coming," Lyra said, her voice panicked. "Then we run," Ethan replied. The marsh stretched out under the pale moon, the tall grasses swaying in the wind. Somewhere far off, the dark silhouette of Ethan's ship waited, hidden among the reeds, but between them and safety lay open ground. And whatever else hunted in the marsh at night. Ethan adjusted Novi in his arms, grabbed Lyra's hand, and started forward. Knowing this was their last chance to make it out alive. A new beginning. The marsh was cold and wet, the mud sucking at their boots with every step. The reeds whispered in the wind, bending under the pale light of the twin moons above. Somewhere behind them, the angry shouts of the patrol echoed faintly. Carried by the damp air, Ethan moved fast, keeping Novi wrapped close in the blanket to shield her from the chill. Lyra stayed right beside him, her small hand gripping his tightly. Her eyes darted from shadow to shadow, every sound in the darkness making her tense. The ground was uneven. with pools of dark water hidden under the tall grass. Twice, Ethan almost slipped, but he kept going. He knew the patrol could be through the grate at any moment, and in open ground, they would have no cover. "Is your ship far?" Lyra asked, her breath quick and uneven. "Not far," Ethan said. "Just past that ridge." He nodded toward a low rise in the marsh, beyond which the silhouette of his ship lay hidden. "Once we're over it, we run straight." They pushed forward, the mud sucking at their legs, slowing them down. Somewhere in the distance, a strange cry echoed long and low, like the call of some hunting animal. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened. "What was that?" She whispered. "Don't stop," Ethan told her. But before they could reach the ridge, movement flickered in the grass ahead. A figure stepped into their path, blocking the way. The pale moonlight glinted off black armor. It was the same patrolman. He stood still, one hand resting on the weapon at his side. His visor reflected the faint silver light, hiding his eyes. Behind him, two more patrol soldiers appeared from the reeds, cutting off any retreat. "You've run far enough, human," the patrolman said, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Hand them over." Lyra stepped in front of Novi, her chin trembling but her voice steady. "No, you can't have her." The patrolman tilted his head slightly. "And what will you do, little half-blood? Fight me." Ethan shifted Novi into Lyra's arms and stepped forward. "No." "I will." He drew his shock pistol in one smooth motion, aiming it directly at the patrolman. The two soldiers behind raised their own weapons, but Ethan's voice cut through. "The night you shoot, and I promise he won't walk away." The standoff stretched, the cold marsh wind whistling through the reeds. Finally, the patrolman's tone changed, quieter but more dangerous. "Why, human? Why risk yourself for them?" Ethan's answer was simple. "Because no one risked anything for me when I was their age. I won't let history repeat." For a moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, the patrolman lowered his weapon. The soldiers behind shifted uneasily. "You have until sunrise," the patrolman said at last. "After that, you stay out of this city or you'll be hunted." Ethan didn't blink. "We won't be coming back." The patrolman stepped aside, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. Without another word, Ethan guided Lyra around him, their steps quick but steady. He didn't relax until the figures disappeared into the darkness behind them. When they crested the ridge, Ethan's ship came into view, a small, weather-worn freighter hidden among the reeds. Its hull streaked with rust, but engines ready. Lyra's breath caught. "It's real." "Of course it's real," Ethan said with a faint smile. They reached the ship, and Ethan quickly opened the hatch. The warm, dry air from inside spilled out, wrapping around them like a blanket. Lyra climbed in first, carrying Novi. Ethan followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The hum of the engines came alive as Ethan slid into the pilot's seat. Through the cockpit window, the marsh stretched endlessly, moonlight reflecting off the pools of water. Lyra stood just behind him, watching nervously as he began the launch sequence. "Will they follow us?" "They can try," Ethan said, "but they won't catch us." The ship lifted slowly, the marsh falling away beneath them. The reeds swayed far below, shrinking until they were just a blur. In the distance, the faint lights of the city glowed like cold embers as the ship broke free of the atmosphere. Stars exploded into view, a sea of silver and gold spread across the black. Lyra moved closer to the window, her mouth opening slightly in awe. Novi stirred in her arms, blinking weakly at the starlight. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked softly. "Somewhere safe," Ethan said. "A place where no one will call you trash blood. Where Novi can grow strong." For the first time since he'd met her, Lyra's eyes softened. "No one's ever said that to me before." Ethan glanced at her, Get used to it. You're not just surviving anymore, you're living. She looked down at her sister, then back at the stars. Thank you, she whispered. The words were small, but they carried the weight of everything she'd endured. Ethan set the course, the ship gliding smoothly into the vastness ahead. Behind them, the city and its dangers faded into the dark. Ahead, the universe stretched wide and open, and for Lyra and Novi, it was the first step into a new life where they were no longer just two forgotten children in a cold alley, but part of something bigger. Ethan didn't know exactly where they would end up. T knew one thing for certain. They were family now.